Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Miranda Stiers. My pronouns are they, them. I am the Prevention Program Manager with the partnership, and I am joining from Miwok, Nisenan, and Meadowland in what is now known as Sacramento. I'm going to give folks, just my team, an opportunity to introduce themselves. I'm going to popcorn it on over to Mercedes. Mercedes will introduce herself in just a moment. Kimmy.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kimmy Remus, she, her pronouns. I'm a prevention specialist at the partnership. I live on Susquehannock, Piscataway, and Nintego lands, and that's Baltimore, Maryland. And I'm going to popcorn it to Melody.
Thanks, Kimmy. Good morning, everyone. I'm Melody Crispoden. I use she, her, aya pronouns. I am also a prevention specialist with the partnership, and I'm calling in from Tongva Land in Los Angeles.
Just want to do really quick housekeeping. You can mute or unmute yourself on your control panel. You can also have your video on or off. Just as a reminder, the webinar is being recorded so that we can upload it to our resource library. You will also be able to see who the participants are, as well as send any chats. Closed captioning has been enabled, so if you're not seeing subtitles, go ahead and click on that. We do have ASL interpreters available, and they will be spotlighted throughout. So keep us moving along. Today we're going to be talking about honoring language and culture as fundamental human rights. And just wanted to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories and homelands of California Native people. This includes over 120 federally recognized and many other non-recognized tribes. And we recognize that Native communities are not a monolith. There are many cultures and languages and a lot of diversity. We want to thank these nations for their generosity and keep them in our hearts and thoughts. We're in this space this week and every day. We're going to get in the chat so folks can see whose land they are joining from. And we'd love to know who's joining us. So go ahead and type in your name, pronouns, agency, and whose land you're joining from. So as folks are doing that, I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing and turn it on over to Mercedes.
Thank you, Miranda. Hi, everyone. So I just like to share my screen now. So give me a second. Okay. And please let me know if you can see my screen. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So I am Mercedes Toon, and I am joining from the land of the Miwok, the Central Sierra Miwok in Cholomi County. So the Central Sierra Miwok in Cholomi County have been the leaders in this area for many centuries and are currently a powerful leaders still. So today, this is what I would like for us to go through. So we are going to have a little intro, and then we are going to have some exchange of knowledge. I believe that each person here is an expert. And we will have probably some small group conversations if time allows, and for sure, big group conversation and some resources. So we will have two parts on this gathering. The first part will be to really honor what language justice is. The second part will be more about resources, about some PowerPoints we have, what means to be an interpreter, etc. All those technical things. But the first part will be about honoring culture and language, and what is really the importance of that. So with that, I would like to move to this. And I am going to ask everyone here to take a deep breath for a moment and to look at that picture, Ubuntu. I am because we are. Ubuntu, as we know, speaks about interconnectedness. It speaks about that it's not possible to exist in isolation. And that when we have this quality, Ubuntu, we are known for our humanity and generosity, as Bishop Desmond Tutu said. So please take a moment and think what emotion this picture touched for you. And if you feel comfortable, write down that in the chat. Interconnectedness, Ubuntu. And we will see through our conversation why this interconnectedness is necessary and is essential. So I would like to share with you a little bit about my background. So please allow me a few moments. Here you can see a picture of my mother and my father. Both have passed away. And this is part of my big family. And this is my son and my husband. And this is a dear group of women, Mayan women. I used to work in the Yucatan Peninsula. I used to work for the Office of Refugees in the Yucatan Peninsula. And through all these, I learned about love, about support, what family means. And I also learned what means patriarchy and what means colonialism and how that reflects and impacts daily life. And I also learned through the experiences about racism and classism and how all those elements impact who we are, what we do, our culture, our language. So I would like to tell you a little story that happened to me about 25 years ago. So I met someone in an online chat, which probably those online chats doesn't exist anymore. It was at the beginning of the internet. Oh my, I just tell you how old I am. But so I met this person and we were getting along very well and we decided to meet. But then an email came to my inbox unexpectedly by accident. And that email was sent from my friend to one of his friends. And the email had a title that was kind of murky was something about the tube, and there was something about the play and about the tube. And I couldn't make sense of that email. So I went to some of my friends that spoke more English than me, and we tried to, translate what that means. So there was a lot of slang, but there were those three words: stick, tube, watching, playing, and it was like, oh, this doesn't look good. And I was like, oh, I don't want to meet this person. Who knows what he said? Fortunately, there was somebody in my family, my uncle, that was a baseball fan. And he said, oh, where is your friend from? He's from San Francisco. Oh, the baseball park is called the stick, is the candlestick. And so anyway, we start kind of interpreting everything, and what happened was that they were watching the game on the tube, and the only word I knew about tube was a hot tube, but it was talking about the TV. So anyway, long story short, everything came clear, and I have been married to that guy for 22 years now. But at the beginning, I said I don't want anything to do with him because it sounded like, oh my gosh, I don't know what that means. What I want to say with that is that context means a lot. If you see this mural that was made by Diego Rivera, probably a lot of those things will not mean a lot for you because it's part of the history and the context of Mexico. Like, I know what each figure represents, like, the presidents, the social classes, etc. So what I wanted to say with that when we don't know the history and the context, the cultural meanings, we can misinterpret some things in a very difficult way. So, social history, personal experience, context, values, beliefs, and assumptions are very important because language is so personal, it's powerful, and it is tied to our lands, to our bodies, to our relationships, and to our knowledge. Every time we speak, we are bringing forward things that identify ourselves, and with that, we also bring our social history and our personal experiences. So, like I mentioned, this first part is about acknowledging the social and political dimensions of language access. Language access is very important, but it is in the context of language justice. So what that means when we say that we are honoring language and culture as fundamental human rights, what that means. And we will get to see why language justice is more than just language access. It is a process of organizing and advocating. Because language conveys not only what happens in daily life, wherever our environment is, urban, rural, also conveys our celebrations, conveys our storytelling, conveys our music, our healing, our sorrows. So language is very powerful. So let's talk a little bit about historic context. So in 1492, it was proclaimed the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery was an international law created by Christian European monarchies in order to legitimize the colonization and, evangelization of lands outside Europe. So that means that they consider vacant lands all that were not populated by Christians. And it seems like a long time ago, right? I said 1492, but I want to talk about two cases. In 1823, the Supreme Court ruled that Christian people have the right to discover and possess the land of heathens in the United States. 1823 Supreme Court case. Also a long time ago, right? However, in 2005, the doctrine of discovery was again cited by the Supreme Court in the case of the city of Sherrill, New York versus Oneida Nation. And in that decision, the court concluded that under the doctrine of discovery, the lands occupied by Indians when the colonized arrived became the property of who first discovered. 2005. So historic context seems like it was a long time ago, but it's still impacting today. So if we talk about language, what that has to do with language, where the language of the colonizer was inscribed as most prestigious. We know what happened with the boarding schools. We know what happened with all the languages, indigenous languages, not only here in the United States, but in all the continent. There was an intentional attempt to erase indigenous languages. As we can see, of 7,500 world languages, over half will be extinct by 2050. And, you know, languages are so important in the construction of our identity, in our collective memory. So here in the land where I am a guest, in the Central Sierra Miwok, they went through that process of colonization, right? And the Indian board schools. So they have been attempting to recover the language, and they have done an amazing work in talking with the elders. As you can see here in this paragraph, until 1950, some of the elders were still talking the language. So they together have been recovering words and putting together their alphabet and teaching the young people their language. Because preserving impact. So in 2008, the Mississippi Department of Human Services took away the newborn of Cirila Baltasar Cruz, a Chatino-speaking immigrant from Oaxaca, because she didn't speak English. And they decided she couldn't reunify with her newborn until she would learn English. So fortunately, there were legal assistance, and she won the case and she was able to reunify. But we can see the impact, the legal impact and the historic impact of things that happened 500 years ago, 200 years ago, and still happening now. So that is about the historic context. What about the legal context? Whereas we know the Civil Rights Act of 1964 established that no person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation or be denied the benefits or be subject to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. And the federal law also said in the Title VI that any organization receiving federal funds should provide language access to DV survivors and their children and dependents. So, as we can see, there are laws. It's the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But let me go back for a moment. When this happened? Oh, was 2008, right? But there is a civil act. So I was saying at the beginning that language access is very important. And it is really important for us to understand the bigger context, the big picture of why language justice, why we talk about the language justice and not only about the language access. So we need to see language justice as a human right, as an individual fundamental right to have our voices heard. It includes the right everyone has to communicate, to understand, to be understood, and overall, to participate in our communities. Because how can we be part of the fabric of the community if we cannot communicate? How can we have any influence in how we want our organizations, our government, our local organizations, you know, how can we do that if we are not able to communicate? So yeah, language access is important. But then we also have to think about how to have language access when there is not necessarily systems of domination, where everyone is treated with respect, with dignity, as an equal. So as we can see, as we saw in the past slides, so past is also present, right? People have been punished and discriminated against for speaking their native languages. And it is still happening. So language injustice perpetuates violence because it silences, it erases communities and dehumanizes whole populations of people. When we are talking about the language justice, we can envision the opportunity to disrupt privilege, systems of domination, challenging dominance and Western-centered knowledge and leadership. So it is much more than just having access. It's much more than that. So I would like to mention that according to the census, to the latest census, 69% of California residents are Black, Indigenous, Latino, Asian, Pacific Islander, and biracial. 69% of California population. And 43.9% speak languages other than English at home. We are talking about over 200 languages: Spanish, Mandarin, Cantonese, Tagalog, native languages, indigenous languages like Choctaw, Luisino, Yurok, Miwok, and other languages from different countries like Maya, Zapoteco, Mixteco, etc. So over 200 languages. So think for a moment what that means when we are talking about language justice. What that means when we are talking about systems of dominance. So we know that interpretation and translation are tools of cross-language, cross-culture, are important tools, and they can be used to maintain the status quo, or they can be used to transform relationships and justice. And with that, I would like to pause for a moment and I would like to invite everyone to be in a small community of 4 people and to talk about these 2 questions. What do we need? What is needed to enable systems of connection? As we can see, there are a number of things that enable systems of dominance. So I would like that we get in our small rooms and we talk about what we need to enable systems of connection, of regeneration, different ways of being, where everyone is seen as equal, where everyone is treated with dignity and with respect. So, Miranda, let me know when we can go to breakout rooms, and we will have 8 minutes. 4 people, 8 minutes, and let's talk about what is necessary in order to enable systems of connection, of relationships, of regeneration. Oh,
Welcome back, everyone.
hello. Welcome. So share with us share about your conversation. So what are the conditions that have enabled systems of dominance? And how can we shift? What is needed to shift to systems of connection? Feel welcome to unmute and speak.
I'll say something. Our group talked about advocacy and talked about training the trainers and education and language specific support groups so that people felt comfortable and connected without having language as a barrier. So offering language specific support groups. We also talked about the fact that things get lost in translation, especially minimized in translation in court, very specifically. One of our group members was sharing a specific story where the client said something and it was translated in a way that really diminished the action that had happened. And so being able to eventually have representation at higher levels as well, the lawyers, the people on the bench, who's sitting on the bench in the first place, what do they know, cultural competencies, and who are they, what communities are they from in the first place? We need people from various communities represented in those places of power as well, long term.
Thank you, Becca, really. Very well said. Somebody else would like to share? So when we talk about conditions, what are those characteristics that enable the systems of dominance? And if we go from the individual to the system, what is within us that can enable that? What can you think of characteristics or elements? And I'm going to use myself as an example. So we know that we all carry assumptions, stereotypes, implicit bias. So sometimes we think that systems are something very abstract, right? But they are very concrete in the way that you operate in daily life. So when you hear someone that has an accent, let's say that it's somebody that has an British accent or a French accent, or somebody like me that has a Mexican accent. So what comes to your mind? There is any assumption? You can put it in the chat, or you can unmute and share. What are some of the assumptions that listening to different accents elicit? What has been your experience?
I'll share a personal story. My daughter-in-law has an accent, and she speaks English, but she doesn't understand a whole lot, but I didn't realize how much. So my washing machine was broken at that time. She was at the house, and so I let her know, don't use the washing machine, because if you use it, it's not filling up, and it's gonna start bouncing all over the place. And she said, okay. Next thing you know, she was using the washing machine, and I knew, because in the middle of the night, it started bouncing all over the place. And then we fixed all this, but she was thinking that I didn't want anybody to use the washing machine. It was miscommunication. It also was assuming that we had both said something that we hadn't said. And it did go into kind of conflict for a minute. Not conflict, but we didn't talk for a minute because nobody knew what was going on. Yeah. So that's a personal experience.
Thank you, Donna. That is it is a good story, because it happens in daily life, small things, but like Becca was saying, can happen for things that are bigger, right? And it has to do with the context. It has to do with what we know, what we don't know. I remember a few years ago, my husband and I were talking about the plumber, and he called this plumber, and then he said, oh man, this man doesn't know how to speak. And I asked, where is he from? And he said, Colombia. Okay, Colombia. What I thought immediately was Colombia, the country, South America. Never mind that we have a town 10 miles from our home that is Colombia. So, and then I go with my implicit bias, because being English my second language, I go like, well, maybe he's learning English and da-da-da-da-da. And my husband looked at me like, what? No, he speaks English, but he just don't know how to make an appointment. He does not business well, or nothing to do with the language. It was more about the way to connect or the way to make appointments. So assumptions and beliefs really impact the way we interact. So it is really, really important to examine those things, right? I remember the first time I went to a training where people that spoke English were given the possibility of having the experience of what people that don't speak English go through, having to use the headphones, having to wait, pauses and all that. And I remember how uncomfortable it was for people whose first language was English. So that to say that it is important to listen, and it is important to step out and to be able to look at what other people that speak different languages go through. And thank you for sharing. And before I move to the next part, I wonder if there is anything else. Candy.
Yes. Hi, my name is Kendi, victim advocate from Centro La Familia in Fresno, California. So just to piggyback off what Mercedes had mentioned, I'll share an experience where, I've had clients where they'll speak English and because of their, maybe accent or whatever it is, I automatically think interpreter, like, do you need an interpreter? And I've had times where clients are like, no interpreter. And then I have to kind of pause and be like, okay, well, why did you ask she didn't ask for the interpreter, you wanted the interpreter. So, I'll take that as, my own biases, that I have to work on that, just because I hear an accent or just because I hear, a certain way of speaking the language, not assuming that this person's going to always need an interpreter. But yeah. Yes.
Thank you, Candy. And I love that you said that, because I think that it shows how respectful is of you to acknowledge and respect the agency of others that have accents. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Anybody else?
I want to piggyback on what she just said, and I'm sorry, I'm working the crisis line, so I may get cut off here. However, I heard her say something briefly about language line, and I do have clients that have callers that speak very limited English, and oftentimes they don't want to use the language line because of the misinterpretations of the interpreter or who's going to be interpreting for them. And they feel like they want to use their own voice to advocate for themselves and share their own story, because using an interpreter is not always effective enough. So especially someone who's not trained in domestic violence, HT or SA. So I have experienced that a lot, and people have said, no, I just want to try and talk to you. And of course our phone calls are a lot longer because there's a lot of clarification. But in the end, they're very happy with the support I am able to provide them without using an interpreter.
Thank you, Francis. That is beautiful. And so a funny story. So I do some conversations where the group is in English at the library. And the last Saturday, we had a new attendee, and he was, I would say, a man that was older than me, and he had some difficulty hearing. So, and we were talking, and I am the only person with an accent in the group. So every time I would say something, and he was so kind, he would look at me and said, I'm sorry, but I don't understand what you are saying. So, and then there was one of my friends who was sitting next to me, and he would repeat what I was saying. And then the man would say, oh, okay. And the conversation would continue. And then I would say something else. And he would say again, I'm sorry, but I don't get what you said. And then my friend would do the same. So through the whole conversation, so I started joking, Okay, my interpreter, please just go. And so the whole conversation was like that. So I think that sometimes it's just, it is difficult when we are not used to hear different accents. And it's nothing shameful about that. It is okay. And it is okay to say, I don't get what you are saying. So please repeat it or use other words or ask somebody to say it so I can get what you are saying. So it's a matter of normalizing. So I want to go back to what I said about 200 languages in California, 200. And 49% speak a language other than English at home. So we need to be very proficient in acknowledging all this diversity that is beautiful and rich and problematic at the same time. So we need to strategize, we need to make ways to communicate, to understand each other. Okay, so, and now I would like to go back to my PowerPoint because I want to share with you a couple other things. Let me see. So here we are. So then I love all the comments because we can see how we can use the concept of language justice as an encouragement to advocate and to acknowledge that every person has agency and that we are in a position of being able to shift systems so we can be more relational, we can enable systems of connection. And why is all that so important? Why language justice? Well, because as we saw, in spite of the laws, you know, we have laws. However, we still seeing that crucial information is provided mostly in English or a lot of times in Spanish. But remember that we have many other languages in California. So I want to emphasize that language justice is a process. It is not a destination. It is not about reaching some perfect state, but it's about creating conditions, and it is about advocating, being intentional, dedicating resources. Are we really looking at our budget and making sure that we have resources? Are we allocating resources for people that are bilingual or trilingual or polylingual? Are we allocating resources for translation of documents? Are we allocating resources for ASL and other interpretations? So it is an invitation to change our culture. And that means to be open to have a culture of acceptance and willingness to listen. And so I want to share with you our resources. We have some beautiful resources in our public page. So let me see how I can do this better. So if you go to our public page here, and So is that page showing? Miranda, let me know, or Kimi. Is
I
the,
am seeing your PowerPoint, Mercedes.
you are seeing my PowerPoint, so give me a sec. Okay, there we go. So if you go to our page and you go to resources, we have a toolkit. This toolkit is really complete. So we have a language access rights and laws. We have a PowerPoint presentation. We have the recording. We did that recording with the collaboration with Asian Pacific API Institute, and has all the information about laws, about resources, what an organization needs for better practices. Some, it has a lot. You can use it. Somebody was mentioning the a training for trainers. I would say that this PowerPoint is not a training for trainers, but it's a training for the organization, for everyone in the organization to be on the same page about what the law said, what are the requirements from OES, what are the best practices, etc. So in that page, also, you will find a language access policy and plan template, which you can customize for your organization. So there is the PowerPoint presentation that I mentioned. So you can use it, you can adapt it. There is also a very step-by-step kind of manual to start your own plan. And there is a limited English proficiency definition. There is a language access assessment, the rights and law. There is a language access assessment tool. There are other resources. And there are a couple other things there that are really useful. The most important part that I want to emphasize is that the concept, embracing the concept of language justice is very important, because it's like having the mission, having the why. Why are we doing this? Why are we giving the same treatment? Why is necessary? So embracing that concept of dignity, embracing the concept of equity, equality is really important. I am going to stop here for a moment. And thank you, Becca. Did you look at that, at the tool? Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. It's really helpful. We have a Russian language program specifically, and we sort of rely on a Russian speaking staff person who's not currently hired to do all of this for us. So we're looking to hire a new person. So having these resources as we rebuild a program that sort of had to go on pause when we lost our staff person is really, really important. And thinking about all the other pieces of literature and resources we have, and yet we don't have our Russian, counterparts for those other pieces. Like, what are we missing? Looking at it as a whole. And since we're trying to build something new, having these resources is really fantastic. Thank you. Gracias.
De nada. So, and I would like to ask you, what are your questions? What are your questions if you have started to pay attention and to bring more resources into your agency? So are you looking for what are the groups in your community around your community that you are serving or not serving? And what are your thoughts about outreaching to them? I would like to hear. A more concrete question is, do you know what are the languages spoken in your community?
So I am in the Los Angeles area, and I used to work in downtown LA. And in downtown LA, it's one of the most populous areas with the most like diversity of languages spoken within like one small community. And so like we have people who need Zapotec, Mixteco, different Mayan languages when it comes to receiving services. And there was this story that used to like really highlight for us why it was so important to have language justice and language access in our community, because there was an incident with law enforcement and a community member, and law enforcement kept speaking to this community member in Spanish, giving this person their directions of whatever it was that they needed to do. But because the person, it turned out, didn't speak Spanish, but instead spoke an indigenous language, it ended in an officer-involved shooting because of this block in communication that there was between the community member and the law enforcement official. So it's definitely something that that if you're a service provider in the LA area, especially in the downtown LA area, that you have to be aware of how many different languages there can be.
Thank you, Melody. Yeah, and yeah, Los Angeles is such a cosmopolitan place, right? And sometimes we think that because in a rural area or in a small city, we only hear people speaking English. Sometimes we assume that there are not other languages. There is one thing that it has been interesting for me to observe in the rural area where I live. I live in a rural area, very spread area. We have like a 50,000 population. And a couple of years ago, I started noticing at Safeway that there are we start having like all these ethnic food, rows of Chinese food, Japanese food, Mexican food, all those things. And people keep saying, but we don't have any diversity here. And so if people are not coming to our organizations, or we are not seeing them in mainstream, could that be because they want to not be seen? Because they don't feel comfortable entering our organizations or showing up at the city council or showing up at the board of supervisors? But if business, and we know that business are very careful about what they put for sale, right? So if a business has already seen that an increase in some groups is because people are there. So what do we need? Language justice is also about imagining, what can I do? How do I go to the groups that I don't see, but they are in the community? If they are not coming, I can't expect that they will come to me, but I need to go there. I need to find what are the places. Is the church? Is the store? Is the park? Is the place where they congregate with their friends? So figuring out, how can we do the outreach in a different way? Not expecting that they would come and then to change something, but to be proactive, to have a plan, to allocate resources. And where do we start? Well, I think that we start inside, first ourselves, embracing the concept of language justice, embracing the concept of wanting to enable systems of connection, wanting to enable systems of regeneration, and then communicating that concept and embracing that concept within our agency. So we all are on the same page. And then if we have a plan, we can start being prepared for those that will come, because we know they will come. Another thing is representation. So once we have identified what are the groups, representation within our staff, representation in the languages. So as we saw in one of the slides, it is not about having a perfect plan. It is a process. It is a process, and it is about commitment. So I would like to pause here and give time for any questions or any comments, any suggestions.
Just something you just said about representation. We're a small nonprofit sort of private group, and we have a board of directors, and I feel like that might be a place. I'm very new here. It's only like second week really full time, but I'm curious to meet our board of directors and see who's on our board and how are we looking at representation, not just on our staff, but board level and people going out into the community talking about the work that we do as well.
Thank you, Becca. And here, hearing you really encouraged me to lift up some organizations, like, for example, My Tree, My Sister's House. And one thing that I find really rich is to partner with culturally specific organizations. So maybe we don't have all the resources. Nobody can have all the resources needed, but partnering, My Tree has a beautiful program that is made of volunteers, and they have like a language, they have a language bank, and they support other organizations when requested. And so we can start looking also around us. In California, there are so many culturally specific organizations. Like you were saying, Becca, sometimes we are a small organization. So partnering with others can be very helpful. Working together, maybe going after grants together. And yeah, there are so many possibilities. So my colleagues from prevention. So what do you think? What are some steps that you would offer as initial steps, thinking of prevention for language justice?
Jump in first, unless anybody's got a jumping. I know one of the things I really prioritized was making sure that it was in the budget, like double checking what's in the budget. And as I'm planning for grants and everything else, of really thinking about what access do we need and ensuring that the funds are there and set aside. And if we don't have it in the budget, if we find that there's something additional that we need, then advocating for that to be made available, whether it's unrestricted funds or really getting creative of, this is what we need to have and how do we pay for that, and not waiting until somebody is requesting. Like we've made a practice of having the ASL interpreters available at all times, because that's going to, if you don't have them accessible, then the assumption is that you're not going to. So we wanted to make sure that that accessibility was there.
I guess I can, did not mean to pin myself. Apologies. There we go. So something else is we talk a lot, Mercedes, as you were just mentioning, about going into communities and listening to them and not necessarily prescribing what we think, which we've also heard from other folks. But gotta be honest that this is still a learning process for us. Like we don't have all the answers and we're still working on it, because we realized, for example, we were really proud of ourselves for, or just thought it was a good best practice. We have on our registration forms, you all probably saw it when you registered for this, we have a question that asks if you need any accommodations. And we do always have our ASL interpreters, but just, if there are any other accommodations that folks need. And then we realized that that question is only in English. And so that one time there was a request for Spanish interpretation, which we were able to get a Spanish interpreter, and that was wonderful. But it made us realize, like, oh, they had to Google Translate that, or had a coworker. They must have had something to let them know that that was the option for them. So the form was still in English, and we were personally a little bit late on the timing, so our materials didn't get translated for that particular webinar. For other things, like for our paid family leave toolkit, we have it translated and made sure that, you know, it was comparable and it wasn't just, you know, that Google Translate copy paste, but had someone actually like really go through it. But that stuff takes time. And for that other instance, we did not budget the time. So I like how Miranda, they said that, you know, budget the money, but also budget the time it takes to do some of that work. So that was a lesson learned.
Yeah, and I would, I totally am with all of that. I was thinking a lot about what Miranda was saying in terms of just like accessibility, and that if you can have it in the budget, is it possible just to have those interpretation services already there? Like Miranda was saying, how we have the ASL interpreters in most of our webinars now. You know, folks don't have to ask for that. We just provide it. And we would love, I think, to build up like a reputation where also folks know that we do have our materials or our presentations available in Spanish, and so that we would just have like Spanish interpreters available. So I think that, but also I was reflecting a lot on what Mercedes was saying in terms of having your staff reflect the communities that you're serving, because I think that that's really important too, in terms of like building trust, and showing that you like really are a part of that community. So those are some of the things that come to mind for me.
Thank you. Thank you, Melody, Kimmy, and Miranda. Yeah, all those things are so important. And I am so grateful for the, you know, real talk, because like we said before, it is not about trying to do a perfect plan. So we are all learning together. We all will make mistakes. We all will find new ways to do it. We have to remember that the way that dominant systems work is that we are used to do things in certain ways. So interrupting those ways means that there is not going to be perfection, but we need advocacy, we need commitment, and we need to support one another in the same way that I said before, that there is no shame on saying when we don't understand something. Could be about knowledge, could be about accents, could be about the things that we do things. So we need to normalize that way of being. And we need to have that grace and space with each other to correct things when they go bad, or when they don't go in the way that we wanted, and then to do it again. So thank you so much. It has been an honor for me to be with you all in community, and I appreciate my colleagues from Prevention invitation to be here with you today.
And just before folks